Like I'll have my phone and my earbuds in and I'll just talk to it like I'm on the phone with somebody.
Wow. And it talks back?
It talks back like that.
Would it help if it reminded you every once in a while that it's an AI and not a
It
friend?
does all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, if I
Whoa.
ask it like a question that is like too subjective, it'll be like, as a language learning model. And I'm like, I don't
I
care.
can't tell you what love is, Daniel.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of DC, and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in state government. And on this week, we're exploring the developing cast of characters potentially interested in being the GOP gubernatorial nominee in 2026, and whether any of them have a shot in November against the Democratic standard bearer, who I think will likely be incumbent Kathy Hochul. To help us make sense of this field on the right, we're joined by Chapin Fay, who has 20 plus years of experience in the GOP communications and strategy game and is the founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs and is the chief online watchdog of the Equinox Fitness Club. Welcome back to Dispatches, Chapin.
Thanks for having me, David. I won the most recent round of battles with Equinox. Good to see
Excellent.
you.
Always a good follow on social media to see what your latest complaint is with them.
Unfortunately, I'm filling my niche as a cranky old man these days. So,
Well, let's turn to your other niche, which is a political observer, consultant, communications expert. And I just want to know, we're 14 months away from gubernatorial primaries, which is a lifetime in politics, but maybe not a lifetime when it comes to preparing for a campaign of this magnitude. So just to get it out of the way, have you begun working with any candidates or groups on the right about a bid for governor?
I have not. I've spoken to several candidates, but I am not involved or affiliated.
And when you say spoken with, is that like you proactively reaching out and saying, hey, if you need a veteran of the Pataki administration, you could do worse than me?
No, I'm at the age where, I just know some of these people and have been having casual conversations, and we'll get into it, but, they haven't necessarily actively started running for governor,
Yeah.
even though they're doing, some of them are doing all the things that they think they need to do to be able to make the decision and go forward strongly. So it is a little early, but I would remind everyone that, Lee Zeldin started right around now. I think he announced, if I remember right, I think he was running by May and gave it a heck of a run and came close. I advise all my candidates, time is your most important resource. It's the only one you have the same amount of, no matter what. So earlier the better.
Well, let's turn to the GOP field for governor. And there's been a lot of news and press salivation about this expanding list of contenders. But I would be derelict in my duties as a journalist if we didn't start with Carl Hyde, who has been a town supervisor in Western New York for more than a decade. And according to local media reports, the Navy veteran wants to be governor. Are you feeling the Hyde momentum in New York City, or is this the first time you've heard this name?
Nowhere left to hide. It is one of the first times I've heard this name, admittedly, embarrassingly.
Well, does someone who is a town supervisor, Bethany town supervisor, have any legs to stand on if it is a field that has potentially multiple candidates who come from Congress or a county executive on a county as big as Nassau?
So he certainly has an uphill battle. Name ID is important. Having a base of support is important. A town base of support, right? Not as good as Nassau County, for example, or the North Country or Hudson Valley, which we'll get into. And he's got to raise a lot of money to educate voters on who he is and what he stands for. And that also, it's a catch-22. You need to have a little bit of a base of support, a name ID. But it is somewhat of a lifetime, right? Anything can happen. Particularly in the Trump era, right? Things move very quickly and things happen. Candidate stocks rise, fortunes rise and fall. So I would never say never. But he certainly, of all the people we're going to discuss, I suspect he's going to have the hardest time to a nomination in one of the parties.
Well, let's not spend any more oxygen on Carl, unless it turns out he's like the Carl of Carl Juniors and he's going to have a whole lot of fast food money behind him.
Well,
But I want to turn to a more recent candidate entering the mix, and that's Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, the North Country Republican who recently had to give up her hopes of at least some time at the UN. The timing of these stories about her interest in a run for governor come right in the heels of her deciding at the direction of the president to focus her attention back on Congress. And I wonder how you are reading these stories. Do you view them as serious stories about someone who's interested and willing to run for governor, or is this more about an ego boost for someone who kind of had some rough stories the last couple of days in terms of having to walk away from the UN ambassador role?
I would definitely say it's not an ego boost. Certainly,
Could it
she
be
is a
two
serious.
things at once?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, there are certain boxes you could check, right? I mean, trial balloon is one word I would use. Let's see how this lands. Let's see what her support is. Let's see how her county chairs and other county chairs who have outsized influence in the process think, and voters across the state. Everyone has to get their name ID up in some fashion. She's from upstate, so she's got to do some work on Long Island and downstate. One of the true pros of her candidacy is she's one of the highest ever elected women in the Republican Party. She's a very successful politician. She is a very serious person. She was about to be the UN ambassador. So I think she is absolutely a huge contender if she wants to go there for a gubernatorial run. I also think, and maybe I'm getting ahead of the conversation, she certainly has the edge in any primary situation. I also think because of taking one for the team like she just did, President Trump has the ability probably to clear a Republican field to some extent for her if he makes that decision. She is absolutely in the mix. So whether this is trial balloon or not, it is not ego for her, I don't think, or inoculation against past stories. She's certainly a viable, legitimate contender. I put her, I think I'd put her in the lead of the other candidates we're going to talk. Though they also have significant pros to their candidacies too, if they so decide to run.
Well, I'm thinking about her strengths as a candidate, and there's a poll from Siena College Research Institute that came out at the end of December, and amongst Republican voters only, and these are registered Republicans, she had a favorable 48%, unfavorable 13%. I compare this to Lee Zeldin at this point in the 2022 election cycle, and he was just 25% favorable and 16% unfavorable amongst Republican voters, and went on to get 44% of the primary vote in a pretty crowded field. So how does that comparison with Stefanik way ahead of where Zeldin was, does that make her the front runner so far, just based on the polling alone?
Yeah, I agree. And if you recall, I mean, Congressman Zeldin, who really gave it a heck of a run, was in a slightly different position, right? She was in House leadership.
Mm-hmm.
She was a huge Trump surrogate from the beginning.
Yeah, she's a national figure.
She's a prolific fundraiser. She helps candidates all over the country. She just has a very high name recognition. And Lee was from Long Island. So, the inverse is true of what I just said about Stefanik with Congressman Zeldin, right? He had to introduce himself to upstate voters. Because of her position in leadership, she does have laid some groundwork in the city, where Lee may not have from right from the beginning.
Well, let's get into the Long Island of it all, because Elise Stefanik has a same number of voters as anybody else in Congress, but in terms of the geographical region that she represents, there are a lot fewer Republican voters than, say, on Long Island, where, based on the most recent data I saw from the State Board of Elections, there's over 640,000 when you combine Suffolk and Nassau. And then if you look at the Hudson Valley, and I'm thinking specifically of Rockland, Westchester, and Orange, you're looking at about 225,000. So how important is Long Island when it comes to a Republican primary? Because I think about 2022, Lee Zeldin sort of had the island to himself.
To your point, so the way a convention works on the Republican side is you have to win each county. In a convention, each county's weighted vote is the number of registered Republicans. So there's certainly some upstate counties that she could put together a coalition. The math is a little different, sort of like electoral math, right? So she presumably would have her all the counties in her congressional district, which is the largest number of counties in any congressional district in New York. Though the population is problematic for her because there aren't a lot of population centers in her district. But there are upstate, right? Monroe County, where Rochester is, Erie County, where Buffalo is, Onondaga County, where Syracuse is, and Albany, which presumably she would get. These are big counties that are important in a primary, and they're somewhat up for grabs because none of the current contenders, except for Mr. Hyde, represent any of anywhere in there. So they're all going to be fighting over those. I just think someone like Congressman Stefanik needs to focus on Long Island and the city. If the Long Island candidate is running, that's a problem, right? The coalition, her coalition is more reliant on getting more counties upstate. Same thing for Mike Lawler, who you alluded to, who I think is one of the people who's doing all the things to position himself where he can make the right decision. He's going to have trouble in a primary because he's a very good representative for his purple district. He distances himself from Trump when he feels it's appropriate. He supports Trump when he feels it's appropriate for his district, but that is going to be complicated for him in a Republican primary, particularly against someone like Elise Stefanik, who was just a Republican star, and Bruce Blakeman, right, who we haven't discussed yet, but is the county executive of Nassau County. And Nassau and Suffolk have been closely aligned over the past couple of cycles, and those are the two biggest Republican counties in the state. And he's got enough to get himself on the ballot almost with just those two counties. If County Executive Blakeman wanted to make a primary, he could do it. Congressman Lawler and Congressman Stefanik have to put together some more counties in order to put together a winning coalition to preclude a primary through the convention process.
Well, I think about the proximity of Nassau and Suffolk, and I sort of as a de facto assumption give Blakeman Suffolk County, but am I assuming too much there just because they're both part of the slender, riotous island? Does that mean there's some sort of affinity, or is Suffolk County potentially up for grabs even if Blakeman is in a primary?
So it's the same media market. All the geographies across the state are very similar to their neighbors, or somewhat similar to their neighbors, right? So Elise will probably get a lot of the counties that surround her district, might not be in her district.
Yeah.
Same could be said for Congressman Lawler. For County Executive Blakeman, winning Suffolk or having Suffolk support him is critical to his successes if he does decide to run. I think he's the one that's telegraphed the least of his plans, but he has to win election this year. He's being a good candidate and a good county executive by focusing on that first. Could provide some momentum come November, depending on what the other candidates do before that. You have to compete there, right? You can't cede anything to anyone in campaigns these days. But certainly they're closely aligned geographically, politically, same media market. The Nassau and Suffolk Republicans have been working together in past cycles. The two county chairmen are tremendous workers. One of them is our RNC committeeman, which, again, if Mr. Blakeman decides he wants to run, I think he has the ability to force a primary if he so chooses. Winning the primary, another story, right? But forcing it, certainly he would have that ability to do that.
Well, before we move on, I want to mention that this week's episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support from New York State United Teachers, as well as the New York State Association on Independent Living. Well, what about the issue of viability in November as a criteria for the candidates when primary voters are making their decision? Because I think about someone like Congressman Mike Lawler, who his entry to politics and his ascension has continuously been by taking out Democrats in blue or purple areas, whether it was the assembly or his initial win in Congress and then another even stronger victory for re-election. Is that something that puts him ahead of the curve when it comes to someone like Stefanik, who has a red district, or Blakeman, who has a redder, at least shade of purple when it terms of what he represents?
There's no question that Mike Lawler is a terrific general election candidate. No question. He is a giant killer. He's a flip from blue to red guy. He's turned the Hudson Valley at a minimum purple and towards the right. But you have to remember who votes in primaries and who drives the convention process. Even the chairs have to answer to their activists. I would say both parties, but I'm more familiar with the Republican Party, but it's the activists who vote in primaries. So these are people, we always hear about electability as an issue in races, right? That's certainly something if Congressman Lawler is in a primary would be talking about, but it's a hard issue to make stick with the type of voters that vote in Republican primaries. They want red meat, probably Trump supporting more conservative folks that align to an ideology. And I think that's a problem for both parties. But in New York, it's certainly a problem for the Republican Party, because to win a Republican primary almost anywhere in New York, you have to be the more conservative and in today's day and age, more Trump supporting candidate, which works against you once you're the candidate in November because of just the sheer numbers of Democrats in the state. And another problem, right, is there's huge population loss over the last 20 years in upstate. The margins to find new voters in the Republican Party up there, or even in the general, are just not as big as they are on Long Island or even New York City, where the pool of voters really are. But, it's activists who vote. So I do think Representative Lawler would have to come up with a really nuanced, smart strategy if there is a primary against someone like Elise Stefanik, who is just, a Republican rock star. And County Executive Blakeman, very popular conservative elected official. He too is rock-ribbed red Republican. Though, if it's a three-way race, perhaps Congresswoman Stefanik and Bruce Blakeman would be fighting over the same pool of very conservative voters, and there might be some moderates who Congressman Lawler can figure out how to get and sort of go up the middle that way. So certainly a lot of ways to slice this.
Well, do you think we're likely to have a three-way or bigger primary that includes heavy hitters like Lawler, like Stefanik? Because no offense to the 2022 crowd, but that included some previously also rans and never ran befores, and I don't think it had the gravitas of what we're talking about right now, which makes me think that we wouldn't actually see these heavy hitters pound each other to death in a primary just for the long shot chance of upsetting Kathy Hochul.
Yeah, no. So that's certainly a calculation that they're making with their teams right now. I think it's sort of a catch-22. If only one of them really makes a move, it might box the other ones out. Certainly, they don't want a bruising primary, but we didn't want a bruising primary in 2022 either, right? The convention process, the other candidates made some headway and got on the ballot, and then there was a primary regardless. So in some ways, you can't, the party tries, but can't preclude a primary completely. Per your point, I don't know that we'll see all three of these. They're all three heavy hitters, right, in their own ways. I don't know that would happen. I also think there's a chance Congresswoman Stefanik just was a huge team player, took one for the team, proved herself to be a Trump person who's on the Trump team and on the Republican Party team in a real way, and they may feel they owe her. I mean, I think President Trump can go a long way to clearing a field, right? When the president of the United States calls you and tells you not to do something, it's very hard to then go do it. So I do think there's some plays there for Congresswoman Stefanik if she wants to go that way. Then again, perhaps Congressman Lawler doesn't feel the fealty to President Trump as strongly as the others, and will force the primary. So maybe it'll be a two-way. It's really hard to do this calculation, right? Because the inside baseball phase is on right now. Actually, I think you'll see them moving around the state, going to the events, having the non-public conversations with county chairs and activists across the state to gauge that sense, right? You do see Congressman Lawler out and about across the state on media all over the place. So he is doing the things he needs to do to be able to make the decision. And that's what he's telling people too. All things point to Elise Stefanik, and he decides the path is shrinking. Maybe he'll focus on reelection to Congress and moving that way. Same thing with County Executive Blakeman. He's got a day job, right? He may not want to force a primary, though I do think he has gubernatorial ambitions, right? And this would be a good time for him to flex those muscles too, to see if it would come. The party will work to avoid a primary because that's what the party does. But ultimately, you can't 100% block it. So it's a complicated question you asked, but certainly their teams are talking about this very thing. I don't know that they're talking to each other yet about this, but certainly that is a question, right? Do we want a three-way heavy hitter primary? And I think what you're going to see for the ones that actually are going to do it or want to do it, they're going to start moving around. They're going to start, doing the same things that Congressman Lawler are doing. And then when the time comes to gauge everyone's interest, that's when they're going to make their calculation. Before, February or March of next year, when petitions go out in the streets and the conventions are held, at some point, you're going to have an idea of who's got most of the counties locked up, who's got the most support. They're going to start doing under the radar attacks on each other, right? Trying to get opposition research out with no fingerprints. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's still they're doing all the right things to see if they can make the run. But at some point, they're going to start turning on each other. Internally, we won't see it, right, necessarily. I mean, you're a reporter, I'm in the business, so maybe we'll catch some wind of it. But you won't see it on, the nightly news necessarily, except you'll start seeing negative stories about all of the major contenders.
Well, are there any future contenders that we haven't talked about? I know there's been some reporting that one-time mayoral hopeful John Catsimatidis is potentially interested. Are there other people? I know the Onondaga County executive, Ryan McMahon, would like to be considered as part of this conversation, but I think he's definitely in a lower tier. But are there any other people that we should keep an eye on, you think?
Yeah, I think we have some very strong members of Congress. We've slowly started to build the Republican Party back up. We haven't had a statewide office in over 20 years now, or almost 20 years. There's a lot of bright lights in New York City. There's now.
Does that mean Nicole Maliotakis could run for governor, or what are you saying?
Well, I think she has those ambitions. She's a very successful, talented member of Congress, the only Republican member of Congress in New York City. Which, if I follow my own advice in the Hill, I like to die on. The path to victory for a Republican statewide is through New York City. There's no question about it. So she certainly would have put the pro a column for her on New York City base of support. There's also lower on the protocol candidates that could emerge. I didn't say that in the right way, but there's 4 Republican city councilwomen now throughout the city.
That's a big jump.
It's a big jump, but these are very successful women who have won. Some of them have won 2 elections now. It is a big jump to governor, but again, you never know who can do it. And by the way, there's a scenario where I don't know that this is likely, but if all 3 candidates that we discussed as being the heavyweights are blustering about running, that might allow other and it keeps them out of it for a certain period of time. That allows other lower tier folks to try and get their name out in the papers and add to it. The more people who run in a primary, it attracts more people. So, if someone's the front runner, right? Let's say Congresswoman Stefanik announces she's running for governor right now. Once the second person announces they're going to primary or run, then everyone else is going to follow. Right. It's that next person who's going to take the chance and say, all right, I'm running for governor too, and we'll see what happens. That allows everybody else and their mother to try and throw their hat in the ring. Maybe we'll see Mr. Hyde get some action. Candidates beget candidates in primary situations. Right.
Well, speaking of action, I don't know how you feel about gambling on politics, but I found a website that takes action on New York politics, and they're taking bets on the Republican nominee for governor in New York. And right now they give Stefanik a 64% chance, a Lawler a 49% chance, and I should say these don't add up to 100%. Bruce Blakeman at 9%, and Carl Hyde Jr. 2%. So based on those odds, and I don't know how familiar you are with gambling, but thinking about those percentages and how they will determine, payouts versus amount you'd have to bet, do you like to put any money on any of those people? Would you say, boy, at 9%, love to get some Bruce Blakeman stock, or 64% for Stefanik? Yeah, she might be the favorite, but I don't like it that much.
2% ain't bad, David, for not having a real base of support across the state, is what I would say. So if you're an avid gambler and you like long shots, I don't see why you wouldn't put a little bit of money there. Hedge your bet. I do think Congressman Stefanik, just because of the primary electoral politics we talked about, does have a very strong edge if she wants to run. I do think Bruce Blakeman complicates it, and so does Congressman Lawler. But if I had to bet on who would win a primary, right now, it would, of the people who are mentioned, I would certainly think she has the edge. So I would give the odds to her. But again, like you started this with, it's almost a lifetime. All of the candidates have more work to do to position themselves to be able to really launch a gubernatorial campaign and say go. Congressman Lawler has been moving around, so I assume he's putting that infrastructure around him to be able to make that decision. I think Congressman Stefanik probably already has that infrastructure. She's a prolific fundraiser. Yeah. She has all those assets. You got to figure out how to legally convert that and turn it into state, donors and assets. But she certainly has a little bit of a lead on that too.
Well, finally, with the 2 minutes we have left, let's turn to the general election, which is even further away. We saw in 2022 that Lee Zeldin got close, not close enough, got 47% of the vote. How do you get somebody across that threshold in 2026, which has the potential to be a national electoral mood more akin to 2018 than 2022, given what's happening federally? So what does that sort of challenge of navigating to 51% look like for a Republican? What do they need to put together?
The path to victory in a general election for Republican is New York City. If you start now, there's no reason you can't put roots down in New York City. Open retail offices in every borough. Have people who look like their neighbors on your team and out in the neighborhood, and out free turkeys and Thanksgiving, right? Or whatever it is that you want to do, but put down roots, right? You can't just swing in and out, try and get media hits. You have to have a strong coalitions effort, and you have to put a plan together to get well over your 30% in New York City. And I think you need to get even more than 30%. That's been the conventional wisdom, is to be above 30%. I think you need to be a little bit higher than that, just because of the, like I said, the dwindling population in upstate. There's a lot of votes in Nassau and Suffolk County as well. So I do think downstate is critically important. But even Long Island, like the Lee Zeldin it was a strong presence and force on Long Island. But New York City is a whole different beast. You really need to have a New York City component to your plan. Without that, you cannot win. It's a very liberal city. It's a very blue city. There's 3 million registered Democrats, 1 million registered blanks, and only 500,000 registered Republicans. So you have to figure out a way to message to those blanks and Democrats, or you're not going to win. There's just not enough Republicans. You need super turnout, a crazy turnout, if you're relying on just a base election in New York. And it's just, as of right now and in the past, it hasn't been possible. And again, I would say I'm optimistic because we've been getting wins piece by piece in the city, right? Like I just said, we just won a Republican seat in the Bronx a cycle or two ago. But you still need to really run through New York City. And for your point earlier, this is a midterm election. There may likely be a correction to President Trump, right? That's typically what happens in any election cycle. The first midterm election, it's very difficult for the party of the president to do well. The House majority is razor thin for Republicans, and certainly the messaging is all going to be anti-Trump, and certainly that's going to be vociferous in New York City and New York State. So that's something you have to really be cognizant of. You can't win an election in New York City, or really across the state that includes New York City, with super Republican messaging. I think County Executive Blakeman, right, is doing a good job of being MAGA and conservative, but talking about it in a common sense way. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that in the city, but a lot of work to be done by all of them.
Well, before we get kicked off by Zoom, we've been speaking with Chapin Fay. He is the founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs. Chapin, thanks for making the time. I'm sure we'll be talking more before next year's primary.
Anytime. Always good to see you, David.
I don't want to live
Thank you,
without
Peter.
AI anymore.
But that feels concerning to me.